the data privacy compliance is kind of like, it's a fact of life, right? It may not be fun or, simple, but it's necessary. So I think that's something that we all need to kind of wrap our heads around. It's necessary because, I think it's important, and the European view is that it's a fundamental human right. But I think really the compliance with data privacy increasingly is really a value proposition for a business. It is a key aspect in acquiring consumer and customer trust.
Hello, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Engatica interview series. I'm your host, Kimberly, and we're really glad to have you join us today. We have with us a very special guest and a very special topic to address today. We have Odia Kagan, the partner and chair of GDPR Compliance and International Privacy at Fox Rothschild LLP on the show. Very warm welcome to you, Odia.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Awesome. So before we dive into a lot of questions that has been requested by the community, let me tell you what the series is all about. The Engatica interview series is a powerhouse of insights from industry experts and influencers from around the world, a platform that provides the latest news on AI, automation, and technologies that will help you grow your business. So come be a part of our community where we learn, share, and grow together. Diving into my first question for you, Odia, could you walk us through the process of preparing a company for compliance with GDPR?
The first thing that you need to do is figure out, one, are you subject to GDPR? Because that's not trivial, and there are a lot of companies that may not be. And if you are, then if you are and you just found out that you are, which means that you haven't really done much towards that, the first thing to do is really to assess what data you're processing. That's always good. It seems like a trivial thing, but anybody talks about data mapping, but you really need to, at least at some level, understand which data you're processing and then prioritize. You start with the more complicated, the more sensitive data, health data, vulnerable populations like children, etc. A lot of data, invisible processing of data, which means data that people don't know it's being processed, marketing, advertising, profiling, automated decision-making, AI, things that are more complicated. And then you need to basically lay out what are your obligations and then prioritize them. And GDPR, like other laws, has basic obligations relating to transparency. So figuring out how and where to disclose your data collection information. In GDPR, you need to figure out your legal basis for that. So are you even allowed to do it? Things like data minimization. Do you need this information, or is it excessive? And then other things, right? Like data protection agreements, right? DPAs, a data protection impact assessment, which is a risk assessment. There are a lot of aspects to it, but I think you begin with understanding whether you're subject to it, understanding the processing that you do, prioritizing the more complex, the more sensitive, the more people-facing processes that you have, and then you go from there.
Awesome. That was pretty straightforward. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges faced by companies in terms of the GDPR compliance?
There are a few things. First of all, there's a lot to do. And there is a lot to do whether or not you are a small company or a large company. And so basically small and medium enterprises by definition have more to do because they have kind of the same to do as a big company with fewer resources, and that proposes challenge. The other is that there are certain things that GDPR really imposes challenges on, right? The legal basis. There are some situations where things that you want to do, used to do, are able to do in your jurisdiction are just simply not allowed to do, right? Or really complicated. And so for example, right, AI or machine learning or facial recognition or, things like that. There are situations I really try when working with clients to kind of get to, yes, like you can do it, but, right? But there are some situations under GDPR where you can't really. So that is complicated. And the other is just kind of the fact that the other sort of mind shift is that a lot of data that you normally didn't think about as something that warrants protection is actually protected. So I see that on the US side, where clients were used to this concept of PII, personally identifiable information, the data breach information. And suddenly they're like, what do you mean email address? What do you mean IP address? What do you mean device fingerprinting, right? And so that is also a challenge. The other, which kind of is a challenge generally with privacy compliance, is that privacy is not, and I actually am speaking about this at the IAPP conference in April, which is, it's not a snapshot in time, right? When somebody tells me, oh, I need a certificate, I need a certification that I'm GDPR compliant, right? It's not a spot in time. It is a continuous process. And even when you've done a lot, now you have a new process, you have a new vendor, you have a new situation, then you have to kind of do your compliance, continue with your compliance. So it's kind of like a marathon, not a sprint. And as somebody who doesn't run marathons, but has friends that run marathons, that's, complicated.
Yes, of course. You briefly touched upon how companies should really go about with the process with GDPR. What is your advice that you usually give companies that are just starting to, consider thinking about GDPR compliance?
It's mostly about when you start out, it's this. First of all, the thing that I try to explain to companies that seems to work better, especially companies that are non-EU controllers, right, is that the first question is, well, who's coming after me? No regulator is coming after me. I'm not in Europe, right? What are they going to do? And the answer to that is actually maybe you're right. Maybe they won't. But the more important answer is, if you are doing business with European entities, especially B2B, you are going to have trouble bringing in the business if you are not GDPR compliant. And that is, just frankly and factually more important for companies than the potential, the potential that some regulators coming after them. And so with that in mind, right, you need to be accommodating to your European B2B counterpart, right? They need, if they need to do a DPIA, you need to help them with the information. If they need to provide transparency to the end user, you need to help them with the transparency. If they need to do a transfer impact assessment for the cross-border transfer to the non-EU country, then you need to help them with that. So I think that's the first kind of, thing that you need to get in mind. And then the other sort of mind shift is I get a lot of, well, that doesn't make sense, or that's not fair. And the answer to that is like, we don't, maybe true, but that doesn't, that's not really something that we control. So we can control is, okay, what do we need to do? And what's the best that we can do? And it might be that it's not possible to get to the 100% or the A+. So then you do what you can to be as close to compliant as you can. So I think, the first question I sort of discussed, like, what's the process? But this is sort of like the mind shift. You need to get your head around, number one, this is complicated. Number two, this is more information, applies to more data than I thought it would. Number three, this is really difficult or maybe unfair, but I need to do it in order to, in order for my business to work in Europe.
Correct. Thank you so much, Odia. This really kind of helps understand different kinds of shifts that we really have. Do you see privacy laws and regulations evolving in the coming years, and how are you preparing your clients for them?
Yeah. So, since I practice in the US, and only this year, we've had more than 20 comprehensive privacy bills filed, and a number of biometrics bills, a number of health bills, a number of children's data bills. We have FTC enforcement, we have HIPAA enforcement. So there is a lot of movement on privacy regulation in the US, in Europe, in the rest of the world. And so that is complicated. I have this hashtag for the US, but it kind of probably applies across, is that it's Kaleidoscope 2023, because it like keeps changing, right? Like a kaleidoscope, it keeps changing, the shapes keep changing, and you get dizzy when you try to follow them, and you need to like keep focus, right? So it is a challenge. The laws are there's a lot of laws. They regulate a lot of things. They ask you to do a lot of stuff. And you need to understand that it is what it is. Like, you've got to do it. You've got to allocate the budget for it. It's something that's got to be done. Number two, you've got to, if you're faced with a lot of different laws, you need to at least be aware of what they are, and you need legal counsel for that. And then probably in most cases, you need to prioritize and figure out, okay, well, what's my key market? What is the lowest common denominator of all of the laws that I need to abide by? So for example, transparency and a higher standard of transparency, meaning you need to revise your privacy notices. That's true for both the US and the EU, right? Data protection impact assessment, which is a risk assessment, you need to do that now, both for the US and for the EU and for other jurisdictions, right? Individual rights, the right to access, the right to delete. So those are also common to most jurisdictions. So you need to figure out kind of what is the lowest common denominator that you have to do, and then keep iterating it and improving on what you can do.
Yes, thank you so much, Odia. Like you mentioned about how all these laws keep evolving and get regulated, how do you stay up to date, constantly evolving legal and technological landscape in your field?
I read a lot. I read a lot. This is sort of the pro and con of this area, which is that it's super fast paced and it's changing all the time, which is super interesting, and I like it and it's exciting. But it is also, fast paced and changing. So whereas you have other my colleagues in other aspects of the law, right? Like, their law hasn't changed in like 2 years, and then everything is, calm, and they just do their practice. This is something that we can't do. So there's a lot of keeping up with, a lot of reading and analyzing and trying to digest it for myself in order to be able to better advise clients. I really think that in order to be good at what I do in this area, you really need to know what's coming down. You need to be able to like read the privacy tea leaves. And I do try to do that for my clients, and I send updates, and I kind of, send, when I see things that are relevant to clients in different industries, I immediately say, this is coming down, this just happened, and I think it's going to happen for us too, and kind of, do in order to get ahead of it. And that's really proven effective. I mean, I've had like, a number, like 5, 6, 7 situations where I sort of predicted something that would happen and alerted clients to it, and they got ahead of the issue where their counterparts or competitors got sued and got in trouble. So it's, it's a lot of work, but it seems to be working.
Yes, thank you so much, Odia. This was indeed like a power pack conversation on GDPR compliance. Are there any other sound bites that you would like to leave our audience with?
I think, I think that the data privacy compliance is kind of like, it's a fact of life, right? It may not be fun or, simple, but it's necessary. So I think that's something that we all need to kind of wrap our heads around. It's necessary because, I think it's important, and the European view is that it's a fundamental human right. But I think really the compliance with data privacy increasingly is really a value proposition for a business. It is a key aspect in acquiring consumer and customer trust. And that's all of the new surveys are saying that, 70, 80, 90% of people say that, the way that companies handle their data is really important for their trust, and trust is the key issue with client relationships or B2B relationships, right? If you mess up and your B2B client sees it, then they're unhappy, they won't hire you again. So I think it's kind of like, it's here to stay, and now we need to figure out what's the best that we can do now and keep iterating on an ongoing basis with your privacy compliance.
Yes, thank you so much, Odia. Thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
For more content, subscribe to Engati and tap the bell icon so you get access to exclusive content coming from thought leaders from around the world. We'll see you with a new episode soon. Bye.